Today's video is highly requested. We are going to tackle engraving 40-ounce Stanley tumblers from start to finish. We're going to go through all the steps, everything from removing the handles, prepping the cup, dealing with the tilt and the alignment and the focus, all the way through. So if that's something that you're interested in, stick around, we'll get into it. What are you going to need to engrave your Stanley tumblers? Obviously, first you need a Stanley. We're going to do a 40-ounce today. That's the most popular and it's one that people really struggle with, so we're going to do that today. Next, you'll need a set of hex wrenches. Why do you need a set of these wrenches? First, you'll find that with the Stanleys, sometimes the screws are one size and sometimes they are another. So having a lot of options available to you will come in handy. But you'll also find that you use these hex screws for all different things with your laser. I really like this set. I actually got it as a Christmas gift from my husband because I was constantly stealing his, and this one has come in really handy. And everything that we talk about today will be linked down in the description. Next, you're going to need painter's tape and lots of it. I recommend getting a big pack. I bought a pack of 6 of the standard size. This is the 2-inch wide roll. I really like the traditional Scotch. This is a place where I haven't tested other things because I want to make sure that I don't go through this when I am testing the designs on my cup. So I stick with traditional Scotch brand. Next, you need a flexible measuring tape. You could do your measurements with digital calipers, but I prefer the flexible measuring tape because I really like to see exactly what I'm measuring, and I'm constantly moving it around to do different things on the cup for either placement of a logo or sizing of a logo. So I really like a flexible measuring tape. What you'll look for is a fabric measuring tape. It'd be something that a seamstress would use to measure for a garment. Something like this. I highly recommend that you get a fabric measuring tape that has millimeters. While your brain might think in inches, I always recommend working in LightBurn in millimeters because you're more accurate, more precise measurements, and most of the settings and things that people will be giving you will be in millimeters or millimeters per second, depending on what you're working on. So just getting in that habit and having that on your measuring tape is very helpful. So I highly recommend having a measuring tape that has both inches and millimeters. Next, you'll need your rotary of choice. I am familiar with Rotoboss, so we're going to be sticking to Rotoboss rotaries today. Anything that I'm talking about should apply for the most part to your rotary. There may be some exceptions on how many steps you're starting with when you're calculating your steps per rotation, and some other features that might be slightly different with your rotary, but your manufacturer should provide any information that you need to be able to compensate for those differences. What are the reasons that you might choose a chuck rotary over a roller rotary for doing this kind of design? If you have access to a chuck for this kind of design, there's a couple of things that it's really helpful for. If you see after your design is done that you didn't get everything off, you can do another pass. Now, that's a lot of time to commit to on your rotary. This cup, I think, took over 40 minutes. So just think about that as you're making your decisions. But you can also do cool things like cross-hatching, or you can just keep everything in the exact same position so you don't have to be perfect the first time. You can run things again with that chuck rotary. So that makes it maybe a little bit easier, especially as you're starting off. But you can absolutely do full wrap tumblers with roller rotaries. That's what I did until the last week. And I have great success with that as well. Today, I'm going to do this Stanley in my bolt. We're going to talk about the Rotobolt, and we're going to use the Rotoboss Talon. A few other things that you should have on hand for getting your tumblers ready is something to measure your focal distance with. I like that little acrylic pyramid, and then a level. I like this one because it can sit on the tumblers, which is really nice. I have no idea where Jason from Rotoboss gets these. I don't even know what to look up. I tried. I couldn't find it. And then if you have a 4-inch lens for your machine, or a lens with a longer focal distance, you might want to use that for your tumblers. I've seen people with the bolts using both the 2.5-inch lens and the 4-inch lens. I like the 4-inch lens, and I use the 4-inch lens on my Nova 24. If you have another laser, I'm not sure exactly which lens is the preferred one for that longer focal distance. Maybe in the comments you guys can let me know so other maybe Eon users or other users can know what they should use. But I recommend the 4-inch lenses for both my Bolt and my Nova 24. The next things that you'll want to have are some cleaner. You can either use LA Awesome, Barkeeper's Friend, Enduramark Blue are some of the most common ones, or the pink stuff. That will remove the powder coat that you're removing from the cup after you've finished. So you'll have some residue from removing that powder coating left on your cup, and sometimes you may have some additional powder coating that's still left on your cup after you remove that with your engraving. So you'll want something to clean that off, and then some version of a magic eraser. I use a knockoff brand of magic erasers for that, just to scrub my cups with when I'm complete. And that's it. That's all you need to get started making your first tumbler. Next, we're going to talk about your setup steps for the cup. And then we'll go into how you set this up within the laser. The first step in our process to get our cup ready is to remove the handle. So that's one of the reasons that people really like the Stanleys for full wraps, because you can remove the handle. So I checked, and this one needs a 3mm hex wrench. So we are going to go ahead and remove the handle. All right. So you can see the screw right there, and then there's a screw inside of there. I start with the one in the top part. Usually this is gonna be difficult to show. And with this hex wrench, this one is obviously challenging. This is part of why you have to remember to charge for your time, people. All right, so remember, righty tighty, lefty loosey, and we are just going to turn this thing around. When you have that first screw out, this little screw, make sure that you put it somewhere safe. I would make sure that you have something like a little baggie to put them in, or somewhere that you keep all of the screws, especially if you're doing multiple orders. Maybe put the color of the cup or tape it to the order, just so that you keep track of those screws. All right, let's get the second one out. This one will be a little easier. All right, now I've removed my screws, and we're gonna remove the handle. You wanna be a little bit careful when you're pulling the handle off the Stanley. Ideally, you won't bend the tabs. So you may see some advice to bend the tabs to clear on your laser, and I wouldn't recommend that. You can try it, but it does damage the integrity of that tab. And I would hate to have you have a customer who had a handle break because you bent the tabs. So pull that handle off straight and make sure that those tabs are intact. All right, so now you can see we have those tabs. And if we were ready to actually engrave this, we would be ready to go. But what we're gonna do next is we're gonna prep this with some painter's tape, because we are going to test our design on the cup before we actually fully engrave it. Now, there's a couple reasons that I like to do that. One, I like to make sure that I like the way the design looks. There might be times that something looks really good to me on the screen, but then when I actually see it at the scale that it is on the cup, I might want to adjust the design. So I like to see that. I also want to check and make sure that things are hitting where I expect them to, and that they're not overlapping. And then I can also test for my focal distance by using the painter's tape. So painter's tape, all I'm doing is I'm engraving really lightly on that painter's tape, and I can see where everything is landing. So let's prep our cup with painter's tape. I am gonna do this the way that I do it, which is ugly. Some people are really precise here. I don't really find that I need to be, because I'm not trying to make sure that everything is absolutely perfect. I'm really just trying to get a sense of what everything is going to look like. So you can watch me do my messy taping right now. One thing to note when you're taping, I do try to not overlap the layers too much. This one's actually probably a little more than I like, because you're adding millimeters of tape. So if you are really trying to get that precise, what is the circumference of my cup and how do I make sure that my design meets up perfectly, that added tape could throw you off. So try to keep it as thin as you can, not overlap. I want to make sure that tape goes right up to the edge because when I do my designs, I tend to have them run all the way across the cup. So I tend to design so that I go top to bottom so that some of the engraving actually goes on the stainless steel on the top and goes up past the cup, just to make sure that I get a really cool all the way to the end look. So when I do this, I want to make sure that I'm not accidentally engraving the bottom of the cup. Okay, so now you can see my cup is fully taped up, and now I'm ready to do any test that I want to do. So I know one of the things that I see the most questions on basically all of the groups that I'm in is how do you focus properly on these tapered tumblers, and how do you get the skinny part to engrave the same as the wider part? And I wish that I could give you a precise answer. I would say Robert Kofed from Computer Creations has a great video, I'll link it here, where he actually did measurements on this. I am much more of an eyeball it kind of person. So I will show you how I think about this in the rotary. I've been trying to figure out the best way to show you how to do these things. It's a little complex with showing the leveling and showing the focal distance. So I'm going to show you everything in the bolt and hold the laser head from my Nova 24 as if I were going to be focusing that as well. So I will show you how to use the autofocus version in the bolt, but also what you would do with a traditional head that doesn't have an autofocus. I'm going to show you that now, and we will do our best to make sure I get all the angles to make this all make sense.
All right, let's get started by placing the tumbler against the Talon. So I'll bump that right up against the Talon, and then I will tighten it to expand those jaws and to pressure fit those little rollers against it. Now it's not plugged in yet, the rotary, so I can spin this cup freely, and you can see that that is just holding on nice and tight. Next, I'm going to go ahead and level it on the widest part of the cup. So you can see there's a little thumb screw and an area where I can level this. So I'm going to loosen that thumb screw, and then I'm going to tilt this down until it is level. Now I'm just leveling this so that I can see what level looks like to start, because I'm going to be tilting the bottom next. So now that I've leveled that main part, I'm going to tilt this until the bottom part is level, that tapered part. And now that that's level, I'm going to go ahead and tighten this down. I may still want to increase the tilt a little bit more when I get further in, but right now I just want to see if I have clearance. So I am moving the laser head over, and I am going to first autofocus on the main part of the tumbler, because that's where I want to make sure I'm 100% within my focal distance. So I'm using the bolt's autofocus feature to focus right on the middle of that tumbler. Next, I'm going to move this over, and I'm going to see if my air assist is going to hit the tabs. Now I'm just looking out to make sure that I don't hit those tabs with my air assist, because I don't want to break the tab. I don't want to break the air assist. So you can see I'm bumping that up against it and just really making minor adjustments to make sure that I have clearance. I'm going to run it up and down a couple times. I was hitting the tape, not the tab, so I just needed to check and make sure that I wasn't going to have any problems. Okay, so now I'm going to try to get the tilt more correct. I want it to be closer on that bottom, because I know that I was nice and focused on the top, but I'm not nice and focused on the bottom. So now I'm working on that tilt angle, and I'm just working to get that nice and tight and locked in. All right, now that that's nice and locked in, you're going to see that I now need to move my Z-axis down a little bit to make sure that I clear on that air. I'm going to link to another video that has an alternative way to set your origin so you don't have to worry about this clearance. I haven't practiced it yet, so I'm not comfortable sharing it as something I do, but it might be something that you want to do instead of trying to make sure that you're clearing these things. So I will link to that in the description. So now that I've completed that, the next thing that I need to do is I need to hold up the autofocus probe. So this is a little bit of a hack, probably not recommended by Thunder, but this will allow you to not have to worry about that autofocus probe hitting those tabs, because that is the last thing that you need to have happen, is that you break your autofocus probe. You're going to have all sorts of problems with your bolt if you do that. Now, some people have used Velcro. I'm using painter's tape here and just making sure that it's not in the way. I've seen Velcro, I've seen some 3D printed things. So choose your method to hold that autofocus probe out of the way. Once I have that nice and secure, then I am done and ready to start running my tests. Next, I'm going to show you how to set this up for the Rotobolt. All right, let's take a look at the differences that we need to do when we're setting up in the Rotobolt. Really, this is just about how you position the cup differently than you would with a chuck rotary. How do you make sure that it's in the correct place on the roller rotary? So the first thing is placing it on the rollers and making sure that you can turn all the way around without hitting your tabs. So differently than on the chuck, where you don't have anything that could impede those tabs, here you need to make sure that you're on the rollers properly. I pushed that back a little too far and fell off. So just making sure that I can clear those tabs against the wheels. Next, I want to bump the heel plate up against the tumbler, and then I want to push it out just a tiny, tiny bit, so I have a little bit of a space so that it doesn't bump up against it while it's turning. So I start by getting it all the way against the tumbler, then move it back just enough to be able to see air. Then I'm going to rotate it again just to make sure my rotation is nice and clean, and it's looking pretty good here. It looks like I do need to probably bump it up against the bottom again. I have a little bit more space than I would like, so I'm going to do that. There you go. So once I have that positioned where I want, then I'm going to work on getting the position of the height. And so with the Rotobolt, this is pretty simple because all you need to do is lift the back piece. So first I'm going to autofocus. You can see the autofocus probe there real quick. And then I'm going to start working on that back portion, lifting that up using that tower. All right, I just moved the tower up to the top position, and now I'm just going to move it down until that tilt is where I want it. It moved up way too high when I put it up at the top, so I needed to just tilt it down a little bit. And I'm looking for that same angle that I had before on the Talon, just with that back end tilted up without having the tabs hit by the air assist.
All right, so I've just shown you how I would do this using the autofocus in the bolt and those few steps that I use to get around the autofocus probe once I have gotten to that focus level that I want. But how do you do this if you are not using an autofocus? If we think of this cup as being in the laser like this level, so if I were to place this level on here, I'd be level right there. But then I want to tilt so that my bottom of my cup is more at this angle. So first I need to measure my focal distance, and I want to try to get as close as I can to 10 millimeters with this 4-inch lens from Thunder, but I also need to make sure that I don't hit those tabs. So that's really the two things that I'm trying to balance, is how close can I get to 10 millimeters here and here on both ends, while also not hitting those tabs. Now, I have found this process to be a little bit of trial and error, but you can get a good sense of if your angle is working with just your painter's tape test. And then this is a good place to use those mess up tumblers or potentially some of the non-branded tumblers to test out your theories and making sure that you're getting enough of that angle. What is that angle doing? That angle is helping to maintain your focal distance. So if you think of the way that your laser beam is traveling to your cup in this cone, right? So when it can't hit from the proper distance that it's meant to on that cone, it either expands the beam or it shrinks the beam, and it won't give you the same results. So you're attempting to get it as close to that focal distance as you can. You're also dealing at that same time with that taper. So all things to keep in mind, but try to get that focal distance as close as you can. We've already tackled one of the more difficult things, which is getting your cup positioned properly in your laser and the focal distance and the tilt. And that is definitely one of the things that trips people up a ton. It's something you will have to practice, or you can be very mathematical like Robert, or like me, you can just wing it until you feel confident that you're getting the results that you like. The next thing that we need to do before we go into LightBurn is we need to measure our cup, because we're going to need that for our design. And so we need to understand how large it is. So I'm going to take my fabric ruler and I'm going to lay this cup down so you can see it. And I am going to just measure that circumference of the cup. And I am at about, let's call it 315, 316. And then I am going to measure from the stainless steel down to the bottom of the cup. And that distance, I designed for about 237. I should be good to go to make sure that my design goes all the way across the top and bottom. The next thing that we need to do is prepare our design in LightBurn. Now, if you don't want to do that measuring yourself, I have a template available. That's what you're seeing in here. This just the couple of boxes that are the templates for where the logo is placed and the size of the logo, and also the size of the Stanley. So we have those measurements and I have my template, and now I am placing my design in my template and I am setting this up to send it to the laser. So when I look at this and the Stanley, I like to place the origin right at the tabs so that my seam is right under the handle. So to do that, we need to decide whether we are going to set up on the bottom side of our design or the top side of our design. Now, my orientation for my combination of laser and rotary, so the bolt, has the motor sitting on the right-hand side. So you're seeing the Stanley logo on the right-hand side. And you saw that's how I set it up in the bolt. And if I was doing this in my Nova 24, it would be flipped the other direction. Now, I also know that in the bolt, if I set my origin right here at the bottom, then my cup won't turn as I start the job. It will just start directly there. If I were to set this at the top, it would run all the way around. And I don't want to set center. While you could center right over the Stanley logo, in this case, I really want to make sure that I am aligned to those tabs, because that is the easiest place for me to set up consistently. So I want to be aligned to those tabs and use that bottom right orientation. Now, you may be curious why my design is hanging off of the edge up here. Now, this is a design choice and the way that I like to create designs for myself. So if you want to learn about why I do this, you can watch this video where I talk about how I use these templates to create my designs. The first thing that I want to do when I test this out is I want to send this to the laser and do a run on the painter's tape. I want to make sure that my edges fit properly and that everything is getting the right distance. So you'll remember we measured that width to be 316-ish. And I am over, but that's because these designs, I know where they fit in on this other side. So I don't really worry about that, but I do need to make sure that they're not going to overlap when I actually run this. So I want to send this to the laser as it is. And then once I'm done with that, and I'm pretty sure that everything looks good, the next thing I want to make sure is that I'm not going to run over that Stanley logo, because I'm not using tape to cover that up. So I'm going to be able to send just the logo to the laser and frame it. So I'm going to show you how to do that after we do this painter's tape test. So if I needed to get everything on here, I would use Shift-click to set that layer. And I am on the layer that I like to use, and I'm using 800 speed and 16 power to get a very light marking onto this cup. And I'm going to go ahead and send this job to laser. I'm going to make sure that Stanley logo is not set to output, because I don't want to have a line there. I just want to see the florals. And so I am ready to send once I check my rotary settings. So you can see that this is not set correctly right now. So my steps are 8,200 on the Talon, but I need to enter the circumference of my cup. So we're going to put in that 316 that we measured. And now it's ready for me to send it to the laser. So here we go. I'm going to send it. I'm going to name it 40 ounce Magnolia. That works great. And we'll check it out in the laser. All right, so I took my cup off of the laser and I saw as it was finishing up that some of the design adjustments I made, I actually ran my designs into each other. So you can see that here, that this overlapped. So my leaves overlapped a little bit there, and then this floral bumps into each other. So you can see that ran over each other. So I need to make some adjustments to my design, and I'm going to run this again. So when something like that happens, there's a couple different things it can be. This one was actually my mistake because I had those designs running over the edges and I didn't double check them side by side. If you want to know how I design, you can go check out this video here. That will help you understand how I think about those elements that run over the bounding box. But it also could be that my circumference that I measured wasn't quite the right size. So I'm going to adjust those elements and run this again and then show you the results. All right, so I did a few tests to make sure that my design looked great and that I really liked the positioning of where everything was coming out. I had started at 316 millimeters for the design, and I ended up at 309 as what I wanted to use. So I used 316 on the rotary, and then I used 309 as my width, I guess really my height in this case, on my design. So that's all set. So now I just want to make sure that from where I am setting my origin against the tabs, that I can outline the Stanley logo with that box. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to not output my green layer. I'm only going to output that box. And then that origin is still going to stay where it's going to stay when I run the whole file. I'm going to send that to the laser, and I'm going to call that my logo. And then all I'm going to do in that is I'm just going to frame it. I'm not going to do anything else. I'm just going to frame it and make sure that it's positioned correctly. And I'm going to move the origin until I am happy that it's framing exactly where I want. So let's head over to the laser and we'll do that now. So I made some adjustments and set my origin at the top of my cup. And now you can see the red dot tracing around the Stanley logo. And I just want to make sure that it doesn't hit, and we are good to go. Okay, so now that I have my logo perfectly framed and my origin is set within the laser, I am ready to send this file. I'm ready to commit to the settings that I'm going to send over to the laser. So I'm going to turn off the output of the box. I'm going to turn back on the green layer. I'm going to use Shift and click that layer to select everything on that layer. And then I'm going to change it to another layer that I typically use for my tumbler engravings. And then I am going to change my speed and power based on what I like to use for this machine. So I'm going to change that to 75 power, 400 speed. I'm using 400 lines per inch, and I'm good to go. So now I am ready to send that to the laser, and then you can watch it run and we will look at the results together. The cup has finished running, so let's take a look at it before I clean it up. I want you to see what it looks like coming directly out of the laser. So if it's your first time doing a cup, you don't panic because it can look a little bit scary and you might be worried you did it wrong. So let's just take a quick look. So if you look at this and you look up close, you're gonna see a lot of the residual ash from burning off the powder coat. Like, whoops, right there. You can see a bunch of it. So don't worry, it's not going to stay like that. So that's what we'll use our cleaner for. So what I like to do next is to just spray some LA Awesome on the cup and let it soak for a little while before I scrub it. And if I happen to not use quite enough power or I have another challenge, then I'll probably use something like Barkeeper's Friend that will really polish that up. Worst case scenario, you can use some acetone, but be very careful with that. Make sure that it's only on the stainless steel. If you get it on the powder coat, it's going to start to remove that or dull it, especially if you have a darker color like a maroon or a black. So you want to be really careful if you're using acetone, but that can get off any other little pieces that you miss as you're learning. So when you're learning, you might want to think about bigger, broader areas so that if your power isn't quite right, you can use that acetone to clean it up. So I'm going to go clean it up and I'm going to bring it back and show you the final steps to reassemble, and it will be ready to go. All right, we are cleaned up and it is time to take a look at these fine details and then put our handle back on, and we are all done. And then we'll talk a little bit about some common issues that I see people run into so that you don't have to have those same problems. All right, here we go. Let's take a look. See, we are nice and shiny, and these are really fine details, which is really fun to be able to do. I like that. It's one of the things I really like about the bolt with that RF tube. It's just those really fine details I'm able to get. Then we need to reapply the handle. So this is pretty simple. Start by just pushing the handle back on like that, making sure that it is locked into place, and then you'll just replace your screws. You want to make sure that you get the screw really tight in there. You don't want it to be visible and you don't want it to be loose. All right, finished product. What do you think? I really enjoy doing full wraps, but I know that they can be super frustrating for people. And some of the biggest complaints that I see and the biggest frustrations are dealing with things on the taper. So a couple different things to look out for there. You're going to see images that get squashed on the bottom of that cup because we have built everything on that larger part of our cup. And if you think about how the laser head travels while the cup is turning, it's not going to be the same on both ends of the cup. So think about that when you're looking at your design. If you want to do circles, you need to really think about where you're placing them on the cup, or squares, things that have a really obvious shape to them. You want to think about where you're placing them on the cup. The next thing that I see people get really frustrated about is the power settings for those different parts of the cup. So go back to really looking at how you are leveling that cup and how you are adjusting it and tilting it to try to get as close to the appropriate focal distance that you need for your combination of laser and lens. And you can be a little bit defocused. You'll hear people say that, which means that you may have your focus be a little bit higher or a longer focus that will make your beam a little bit wider and still potentially be okay. But remember, you lose power by every step you take up. You lose some power, so you may need to increase your power and you may have to do a couple more things. Be mindful of those things that might cause you problems. I wouldn't say that on your first design that you're doing that you have something that has to meet up perfectly on the lines 100%. The design that I showed you here has a loose feel to it where things don't overlap, but you can see there's no distinct seam. That is going to be so much easier to start off with. So I highly recommend doing things like that first while you get comfortable. Also, plan to have a few mistakes. You know that you're going to have some things that you need to test out a few times and that you're just going to have to use the mistake to learn. And if you do have a mistake, use that cup to test everything you can. I'm going to link a couple of different helpful videos for things like ramp tests and other tips and tricks that you can use to improve your tumbler making. Now, if you like this style of teaching, which was way more step-by-step than I normally do here on YouTube, I'd love for you to check out my course, You Can Laser, which is really my beginner course that walks you through project-based lessons to help you learn LightBurn and your laser. Everyone's laser behaves a little bit differently, and if you are in that place where you are looking for settings everywhere and needing to ask all those questions, this course will really help you get through that so much faster because you don't need to worry about what everyone else is doing. I'm going to teach you how to figure it out on your own. And we are going to learn lots of tips and tricks in LightBurn and how to navigate it so that you are going to be the master of your laser super fast. It is a self-paced course, so you can take it anytime you're ready at the pace that you're ready. If you have questions, please feel free to reach out to me, but you can find that at thingskatiemakes.com/youcanlaser or down in the description. Now, What do you want to learn next? I know we have done a lot of tumbler work lately, so I'm curious what else people are interested in right now in their laser journeys. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next one.